I have a good news and a great news. The good news is Miss Mighty did a great job explaining blockchain, so I'll spend less time on boring things or things that we already know, and I'll spend more time on practical applications to blockchain. And the great news is that will give us some more time for questions and answers. So let's start. My name is Khaled Khorshid. I had the privilege of working with technology for the last 30 years. And the last few years has been more exciting because the changes that happened in technology has been enormous. Being part of the utility industries for the last 25 years, mainly in telecom, we all know that we really need technology for two things, majorly. I mean, if we look at the application of technology are really either to have a great customer experience, improve the customer experience, because we're all here for the customer. Secondly, is to improve operations, AKA reduce cost and improve efficiency. Blockchain is doing the same thing for utilities. And in fact, there are multiple applications for blockchain, but what I'm going to be focusing on for the next 15 minutes is actually on how can we use it in utilities to improve efficiency and reduce cost, and most importantly, how to do it for improving customer experience. Because I'm lucky to pass through some of the things that Mighty has passed through, so you will find some of the slides are redundant. Good news is we're going to pass by it. If I can figure out how to, here we go. So briefly, what's blockchain? We'll skim through that. The cases of blockchain that really applies to utilities, the challenges, and some of the recommendations. As Mighty has mentioned, it's a peer-to-peer system for allowing trust between participants to exchange value. It is a chain of blocks, each block representing data. I'm not going to bore you with that. It's immutable, so the security aspects, obviously, and the fact that you cannot tamper with data is definitely attractive. It is highly secure because of the hash technology, the cryptography technology. Again, not going to bore you with this. Let's jump into some cases. So the Council on Foreign Relations had this very nice graph that I actually found interesting. This data is from probably the first half of 2018, up to the first half of 2018. These are blockchain initiatives in the electric power sector. And they're divided by, they put them in a pie chart to represent the percentage of such initiatives. So peer-to-peer transactions, as Mighty mentioned, it is most of the blockchain solutions that you hear of are exchanges, marketplaces, where rooftop solar-generated power could sell the overage or generated power to the grid in a way that allows for a transparent, no middle person or middle authority to arbitrate this transaction. And it is also an opportunity for small and large participants of power generators to get into the market, which is a benefit, obviously, for the entire market. Blockchain is also used in grid transactions, in being able to decentralized the wholesale of power. Obviously, the uptake of blockchain is decentralization and having the data distributed and not having a central database where actually there are vulnerability and security issues with having a central database. And it is a way for using the power of technology to find efficiencies in moving power from low usage to high demand areas. Some of the projects that you saw on slides that Mighty put is the Sun Exchange. Also, some of the examples are for electric vehicles. Here's another example, other than the one Mighty mentioned, which is in Southern California, which is called e-Motorworks, where actually independent solar providers have electric car charges. Using blockchain, you can walk up using your blockchain wallet, your cryptocurrency wallet, or your wallet topped up with whichever currency. You can actually charge your vehicle and pay all seamlessly on the blockchain. There's also another one in Germany called Motionwork. There's plenty of examples of other uses of blockchain in the electric utility sector. We mentioned earlier Estonia as a country that actually is embracing technology, and part of it is blockchain. One of the things that I've read, we've actually read recently, is the government of Dubai is in fact putting timelines for rolling out blockchain as a mean of dealing with the government with suppliers. So on the supply chain part, they want to use blockchain to arbitrate the purchase of government assets. So use it in procurement, basically. So we're seeing some of these initiatives come up as pilots. Some of them are actually more advanced than pilots. And the one I want to highlight, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, is the focus on customer experience and the focus on efficiency. Yellow, we actually co-founded Yellow 2 years ago after my co-founder and I and the team did a digital telco in Saudi Arabia called Jawi. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Jawi. Anybody heard of Jawi in Saudi Arabia? It's a digital operator focused only on the young Saudis. And why am I mentioning this? It is really a true digital end-to-end service provider. And it is a good example of a digital strategy that actually went to saw the light and actually is now is a reality, with about 1 million customers generating average revenue per user much higher than their counterpart in other SEC products. And when we created Yellow, we wanted to translate or take this learning and create a digital platform to help other service providers, whether utility, whether telecom, whether electricity companies, any service provider who's servicing customers, to give them this platform as well as commercial consultancy and strategic consultancy on how to become a digital customer journey providers. All our customers in utilities, including in Oman, live their lives digitally in all aspects. You know, they use ride-sharing apps like Uber. They buy from Amazon. They do most of their lives from the mobile. When it comes to utility providers, electricity or telecom or water, we as an industry are still a little bit behind when it comes to, obviously some are more advanced than others, in providing such a digital experience to the consumer. And basically the customer is demanding a way to control their account. So a customer would want from a mobile app or from a website to go in and check their account, check their bills, pay it, maybe change the parameters of their service, add value-added services, subtract some of the things that he or she has. And to be able to do this, you need, or we need as a utility companies, a digital platform as well as a re-engineering of our processes and business processes and procedures to be digital. So we opted to do, and we started actually, we're right now in the first implementation in a large operator in the Middle East for NDA purposes. I'm not levied to mention who, but we're implementing this solution in one of the mobile operators in Egypt, actually. And this is on the customer experience side. On the improvement of efficiency, we actually opted to do, we looked at telcos and electricity companies and their pain points internally. And one of the vivid examples that came for a good implementation of blockchain was what we call cross-trade agreements, right? So, for example, I'll give you an example that is very relevant to electricity, power sharing agreements. So we have power sharing agreements or cross-trade agreements between the power generation company and the distribution company. These agreements are living documents. They're living, they actually have details about pricing, details about terms and conditions that eventually is translated into invoices at the end of each month, and these invoices are paid. Well, same with telecom, for example, we have 800 mobile operators in the world, just to give you an order of magnitude here, and why we thought this is a great thing, and we're actually piloting right now, is 800 mobile operators. Each of them has a bilateral agreement with the others. So 800 times 800, you can do the math, is the number of roaming and interconnect agreements that all these companies are managing among themselves. And when you look at really how these are managed, they're still managed in the 19th century style. They're basically agreements written on paper, now shared on PDF. Maybe the latest that they've done is they're signed on PDF digitally, but at the end, they go in an inbox and they are put in on a server somewhere, and every time the agreement is changed, every time the rate is changed, which happens at least once or twice a year, it goes through the cycle of approvals. That's one. Let's talk about the settlement. The invoicing are happening. Yes, each of these operators may have an ERP system like Oracle where you generate the invoice and it's approved, But actually, at the end of the day, it still goes through the cycle of a typical payment. It goes to account payment department where actually it sits there for a while, and then there is emails back and forth going between the two operators. What is my money? Well, we're going to send it next week. And then you end up losing money, effort, for things that are done repeatedly, which is a perfect example for what blockchain is created for, is actually for taking away the middle person or the middle man and improving the efficiency and saving cost for enterprise. So this is the summary of what I just mentioned, and our solution in yellow is actually Treeon is the spin-off of Yellow for the blockchain solution. So we introduced an on-chain solution for our digital platform, and we have an enterprise solution, which I mentioned now, which is cross-trade agreements. And also we have the consumer. The consumer is a bit advanced for markets that do not have a cryptocurrency approved by the regulators. But in a nutshell, it's a way for consumer to have the ability to use a wallet. This wallet can have cryptocurrency, can have fiat, and they can pay for their electricity, for their water through that app and manage their account. So I I'm traveling for 3 months, I want to shut off my electricity from this platform, I can be able to manage my account and opt in for services or opt out for services. And this is actually the prototype. So this is an example for Korea on the middle screen. Here is your wallet. You have $50. And obviously, you can use any cryptocurrency. In our case, it's Treeon's. And you can pick your provider, and you can see the bill, and you can pay it. And very quickly, I only have 5 minutes, but I want to mention the challenges that that blockchain is presenting, which are things that we need to consider, obviously. Some of the challenges are they're not suited for all use cases, obviously. Not all use cases can be automated on blockchain. There is an issue with transaction speed. Many people don't talk about, by the way, the private blockchains. The public blockchains are slow. So I'm sure you've heard of the Bitcoin and the Ethereum are very slow, 6, 7 transactions per minute. It's ridiculous. But obviously, for enterprises, especially for utility companies, the example I gave about cross-trade agreements, it was not going to be on public blockchain, of course. It's going to be on private blockchains between the bilateral companies. And that will have a huge, much faster speed of transaction. Governance is an issue or a challenge that needs to be addressed, obviously. And user complexity requires a lot of, if you go in a company and you start to talk about blockchain, you need to actually educate the stakeholders before talking about the solution. So there is a learning curve that needs to take place. And our recommendation is, if you are really, we need to benefit from blockchain, you need to start training your stakeholders. Because you're going to have middle management sitting in meetings with solution providers, want to give them requirements. How can they give them business requirements without knowing what this solution is capable of? So learning is very important. Training is important. Seeking, obviously, practical use cases to start with that impact the bottom line. I've seen throughout my life so many pilots that really did not have a bottom line improvement, and they just die and they're a waste of money. So you really need to pick what's the first low-hanging fruit business issue that you may want to resolve with blockchain. It's going to give you the success you need. And obviously, the third thing is developing blockchain standards for the context that you're in. Oman, for example, the standards between the electricity providers and the regulator. And one of the things that has been done is actually to set up what they call a regulatory sandbox to enable demonstration projects. I hope that was interesting. I hope I didn't take much of your time. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to getting your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the presenters, and I guess we will start the discussion panel now, and we have some questions coming. We will start directly, and we will go to the questions that we have received. And this question is going to Khaled. The question is about the possibility of modifying the data once it's written in a block. So is there any possibility of?
By DNA, the blockchain. So it's called blockchain because it's a chain of blocks, and each block has a hash from the previous and defined the previous block, and then defines also the next block. So if you try to append the data in a block, first of all, it would be flagged by the rest of the blocks and saying, hey, this is not right, because every time you do any change in a block, the hash of that block or the key for that block is changed. And once it's changed, it is flagged by the rest of the blocks or the nodes saying, hey, this is not, doesn't belong here. So it's not possible. Obviously, there are ways, I'm sure you've heard of what they call the 51% issue or challenge, which basically if someone can control 51% of the blocks in a blockchain, they can do this change. In a private blockchain, this is not possible, obviously, because it's within your confined security environment. And most of the public blockchain is very difficult because it needs huge processing powers. So it's very, very, very rare that that could happen.
Okay. The next question is for Mighty, and this question is: what type of records can be kept in blockchain, and is there any restrictions on it?
That's a great question. So what type of records? Really, it can be pretty much any kind of record. Generally, the use cases tend to look at highly sensitive data. So you tend to see more scenarios in like medical records, land registration, things that, again, carry value either because of the sensitivity or of the actual monetary value. But it really can be any kind of record, really.
Okay, the next question is a little bit related to an area which is very much of interest to the NEMA group. And this relates to, do you think that blockchain can be an enabling technology or a needed technology to spread the use of renewables and decentralized generation in the system or not? And I want to pick your view, or get your views both on this. So Mighty, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think somebody in the earlier discussion talked about how distributed generation, and when we talk about these peer-to-peer microgrids, how they can improve the health and the resilience of the overall grid. So I think that on the point of helping that, and whether it's necessary and whether it can enable distributed generation, yes, 100%. And I think that as demand increases, and yesterday I think at dinner we were talking about global warming and how that potentially can impact the demand of energy, that would be very important. Yeah, so that would be my 2 cents on that.
My answer is obviously yes. 3 years ago, before starting up my current company, my startup, Yellow, I worked in Africa on I managed a startup in solar. And obviously, when you have renewable energy, you need to interface it with the grid, because you're a supplier in case your generated electricity is not used. So why do you need blockchain? Well, you're going to have to issue invoices at the end of the month between, whether you are an independent or an individual supplier of clean energy to the grid. Somebody has to pay for it, so you need to issue invoices. And the power of blockchain actually can manage this relationship, this transaction, because it resolves the issue of trust. It is secure, and it gives you ways to have intelligence in managing supply and demand between renewable and the grid. So absolutely, yes.
Without the blockchain, the decentralized approach might be, or decentralized generation approach might be a little bit of a challenge, which I can summarize your views on this. So it cannot go in the traditional way of,
yes.
of this. It will be much easier using the blockchain technology.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
other technologies like AI, for example.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
you're going to get into more sophisticated use cases, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we're going to reach there where you need an AI in addition to the blockchain to actually arbitrate and make the decision, or help decision makers make the decision based on the huge amount of data coming in from all sides.
Let's see the other side of the picture, the opponents of implementation of blockchain, or people who see blockchain is not a technology to be used in the future. And one of the arguments against implementing this technology, as you might know, is the fact that it requires huge investments. And in an industry like ours here, the electricity industry in Oman, this might be one of the key challenges for adopting such a technology. What are the ways or options we can work around this?
Yeah.
Ladies first.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to answer that with my innovation hat on. I think that a sensible approach to onboarding any kind of emerging technology is always to set a roadmap whereby you create a minimum viable version or a pilot of that technology based on the low-hanging fruit use cases that you might want to understand. Monitor, understand the technology, and kind of start growing from there, so that proportionally your investments and the value that you're getting are, it's not a big bang approach at first. And as you continue to understand the technology and make more investments, you do so with a lot of lessons learned in the kind of iterative process.
My take on this is, any technology that's disruptive, it never starts with a big bang. As I mentioned, you can find practical use cases inside any utility that is impactful, number one, and that's not expensive to implement, like the cross-trade agreement. By the way, the cross-trade agreement solution we are piloting right now with an African operator, and it's really, we're starting with a scope that's very, very narrow, extremely narrow, because we need to make sure that we resolve the main issue, couple of issues, really, the problems, and then we expand. So it is, at the end, a huge investment, but I don't think you need to take it on from the beginning. You can start with a small scope and improve and increase after you reach small successes.
I guess you have touched on a couple of important issues during the presentation, and the challenges of expanding the use or the implementation of such technology is the fact that we still need to answer questions related to scalability and governance when it comes to blockchain. What's your take on this?
Scalability and governance. So scalability, I think, it's one of those things that I think we need to take a step back and look at the essence of business models. So it's not just the technology itself within your current business model and your current legacy processes and technologies, but essentially changing the very essence of how you conduct business. So, we talked about comparing it to the internet. If back in 1985, we explained to someone the concept of Airbnb or Uber, it would have blown their minds. So I think that, we need to really look at that as a starting point of disruption.
Scalability, if you're taking a look at it in a micro view, as I mentioned in my presentation, you need to use it in an enterprise setup. You need to have it as a private blockchain. And scalability there, in terms of speed of transactions and data volume, etc., is really the sky's the limit, just like any other system. Governance is definitely important, especially if you have multiple success pilots and people started to open up their eyes on the use cases and they start to have greater and bigger scope of use cases. Then the regulation needs to really be aligned with this growth to provide the safety net of whether you're an electricity regulator or the telecom regulator or the financial, obviously the banking regulator is very important there in any aspect, because eventually you can use cryptocurrency, even your own cryptocurrency, if you as a company want to have your own, or a country can have your own. So obviously those three regulators, if we're talking utilities and the utility regulators and the financial regulator must be aligned and up to speed on what's happening in the world to provide the safety net for companies to thrive with blockchain.
If I can just add a point to that, I think both you and I talked about sandboxes. So when we're talking about a sandbox, which is a controlled environment, and we're talking about experimentation, in an ideal world, in that sandbox, we have representatives from the government, and we have representatives from the private sector, and we have maybe people from research and development from universities, and everybody's collaborating to create that unified vision so that everybody is going in the same direction.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we will open the floor for any questions from the audience.
Thank you for nice presentations. I mean, my simple understanding of blockchain, and I try to simplify this so that I can understand it, is that it's a technology that enables us to do what we do today, but we do it much more securely. And this security comes from using very complex algorithms. And the computation of these complex algorithms requires power. This is why people say that to mine one Bitcoin, you need the same amount of power that powers a house for a day or something like that. And I guess with time, something has to be done about this because we cannot consume. I mean, people predict that if you want to run in Bitcoins, a good portion of the energy consumed in the world have to just go to producing Bitcoins. And Bitcoins is one of the, I guess, currencies or application that uses blockchain. Where do you think this is going to go? And are we going to address this energy issue? Or we just have, if we want to use blockchain, we'll have to cope with the fact that it is going to be an energy-consuming technology.
Let me explain something. First, because Bitcoin is a public blockchain, so the consensus algorithm, which actually basically the challenge that each node needs to resolve to be able to participate in validating the transaction, is in fact creating all this power thirst, I should say. But this is because it's a public blockchain. If you have a private blockchain, because blockchain can have a very good use case internally, you don't need this consensus algorithm because it's all the nodes you control, all the nodes are within your security, your firewall. So the challenge that you need to give to the nodes to verify the transaction can be very simple, not requiring all the processing speed which require power.
There's also exactly that. Permissioned blockchains are a way to mitigate that issue. Another way that people are thinking about it is that the algorithm that is required is called proof of work. So it is very, very complex because, I'm not a mathematician, but it is very complex. There is another form of proving that transaction and validating it, which is called proof of stake, which essentially relies on everybody having a monetary stake on that validation. So the algorithm complexity is reduced, and so these are other ways, and I'm sure will continue to evolve, whether it's a permissioned ledger plus another form of simplifying that algorithm, and probably other techniques that will try to address that, because I do not think that it is sustainable to have millions of miners around the world consuming unconceivable energy. Yeah.
If there are any other questions from the audience, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. That was very informative. My question is, there's this hype about blockchain. There's a hype about blockchain, and no one is talking about the risks. And if you're an innovation, you know that there are people who are always trying to outdo or to bring it down. So I would like to get your take on your thoughts on risks of suddenly changing the way we do business to blockchain without considering risks of, I don't know, cybersecurity or IT evolution. So that's my question.
I'll just take this real quick. There's no straight answer for that. The reality is that blockchain and really all these emerging technologies that we saw on the Gartner scale are constantly evolving. So it is a moving target. What that means is that as you are innovating, and we talked about doing pilots and progressively iterating through that process, that on each iteration you need to essentially have a risk assessment and having that at the core of the considerations of your requirements and what you're implementing. So there's no straight answer to say, okay, well, this is the answer and therefore you will always be secure. It really is a matter of having awareness and really testing as much as you can to ensure, or even bringing hackers on board to try to have those hackers try to break your system. Yeah.
Let me bring this home. I mean, definitely there are risks associated with security on a public blockchain. But if we are talking, the more secure way, and actually what we are promoting when we're talking to our clients and utilities is let's talk about private blockchain first. Forget about Bitcoin and being on the Ethereum blockchain to do to automate your processes. I mean, it's useless. Why? Because it's transaction speed, power, etc. So if we're talking about a private blockchain or permissioned blockchain, the same security aspects or challenges impacting your ERP system internally would apply to the private blockchain. If you have issues, may have challenges of intruders coming into through your firewall to tap into your, employee records, you will have this. These are the same challenges you will have in your private blockchain. In fact, it's more secure. Why is it more secure? Because in a case of a database of payroll, for example, let's talk about it. It's a good example. It's a one single point of failure or one single point of attack. I can go through the firewall, go into the database of Oracle HRMS, and look for that table that's called salaries, and it's one place where I can actually, as a hacker, go in and tap the data. But with a distributed blockchain, distributed system, like a blockchain, private blockchain, this data could be on different nodes and hashed, very secure because of the cryptography used, and it will actually make it much more difficult for hackers to tap into the data. So this is, I hope, it's a good example.
Well, I guess we are running out of time, and I think time out for this session. At the end, I would just like to highlight one thing. I think personally, I'm very happy that this technology and other technologies are being discussed in Musharaka. I think this is very important. New competitors coming into the market can displace incumbents like ourselves using such technologies like blockchain. We need to start thinking of these as a NEMA group. It's very important, and I think this is the starting point for adopting or thinking about blockchain and other technologies. At the end, I would like to thank Mighty and Khaled for the presentations and the information you shared with us today. Thanks a lot, and I guess this the end of this session. We received some questions from Yammer and other participants. We will try to get the answers to those questions offline, and we will share them on Yammer also. So thank you very much.
Thank you.